Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Multiplexes are finally about to be launched in BC cities. We're going to talk about whether the provincial government made a critical error when they launched their policy that's going to limit the amount of multiplexes we're going to see across the province. We're also going to talk about how a slowdown in development is hurting cities' revenue and how that's going to affect you and I in our pocketbooks. Real quick before we get started, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. When I'm not making videos like this, I'm helping clients buy and sell real estate right across the Lower Mainland. So if that sounds interesting to you, or you're curious about how I could possibly help you, you can book me for a free call in the Calendly link below and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future weekly video. All right, so I want to hop right into it. If you followed my channel for a bit, or you've just followed the news, you would be aware that the provincial government back in November of last year basically blanketed the majority of the province and said, for all single family zones, cities are going to have to allow for multi-units, and whether that's 3 units, whether it's up to 6 units, comes down to various things, including the size of the lot, comes down to proximity to transit. But this was basically the provincial government sending a message to the cities saying, you know, you haven't been doing your part in making sure we have enough housing units here. So we're going to step in, we're going to take over more power, and we're going to mandate this. But we're going to give you until June 30th to update your own zoning bylaws to reflect these changes. So over the last several months, cities right across the province, especially here in the Lower Mainland, have been spending a lot of time and effort in terms of how exactly are they going to change their zoning policies to allow for more units and to allow for more livable space for people like you and I. The reason this is interesting at this point in time is when the provincial government came out with this policy, they also tacked it on to targets that they were putting on municipalities across BC, housing completion targets. So there was, if you recall, a series of legislation that came out over a period of a couple months. And so now we're going to see the fruits of their labor, and we're going to see whether their policies and what they're mandating on the cities is going to work. So, you know, what they have done is they've set benchmark levels for certain types of things within the zoning, within this multiplex development. So, for example, they're benchmarking to the cities in terms of story heights, how high you can build on these sites. They're benchmarking to the city setbacks, so how far from the lot line essentially you can have your structure be placed on. So there's a huge policy manual. I'm not going to bore you with the stuff that's in there, but you know, one of the key elements when it comes to developing for builders is something called FSR, floor space ratio. And when the province first announced this, it would have been, I think it was like September or October of last year. They mentioned that they were going to release a policy manual, and that was going to dictate all of the provisions for the cities. And really for us as realtors or developers, builders, we didn't really have a clear line of sight until this policy manual came out. And one of the things that I was looking for is how were they going to mandate FSR, floor space ratio. And what that means is it tells you exactly how much square footage you can build on a certain size of lot. And my impression is that the FSR, right up there with units, is one of the most important parts of this legislation. It's going to determine how much space a builder can build. And if a builder can build a higher FSR, there's more revenue for them. There's more space that they can build. And if they can only build a restricted level of FSR, it hinders, it gets in the way of development. Long story short, policy manual comes out and there are no FSR guidelines. The FSRs are being allowed to the city to determine how they want to deal with the FSR. So when I saw that, for me, I thought that was a critical or a large gap in their policy. The way the province is looking at it is they're saying, well, we're mandating so many other components, again, including the height, the structure, how much coverage you can have on a site. So in doing so, they didn't want to further restrict the cities when it came to FSR. The problem is, as you may know, there are a lot of cities out there that are not great fans of density. All you have to do is look at development comparatively, for example, let's look at Vancouver versus Burnaby over the last 10 years. Burnaby very pro-development in specific areas. You see that in Brentwood, Edmonds a little bit, Metrotown, but pro-development. And then you have Vancouver, which has been truthfully very NIMBY driven. And you have SkyTrain stations all across Vancouver that don't have any high rises yet. So you can see how certain cities treat density. And so when you leave that density back into the city's hands, even placing targets on them, that leaves a lot of room. That leaves a lot of room for cities to have too much power and maybe control the level of density and development that we see moving forward. As an example, and I need to preface this by saying that this location would have never been a multiplex zone. It just wouldn't make sense with the land costs, et cetera, et cetera. But if we look at First Shaughnessy in Vancouver, the city is toying around with an FSR of 0.5. And to give you an idea, multiplex zoning in Vancouver is 1.0 FSR. So if it's a 4,000 square foot lot, you can build 4,000 square feet for 1,000 square foot unit. So a city could basically say, no, we're going to shrink that FSR. And now when a developer looks at that site, there's no money to be made. You can't even cover your costs in many scenarios. Now, the refreshing thing is that most cities, so far as they have been planning this over the last several months, it looks as if they're not going to be very restrictive with the FSR. But what I'm watching for is come June 30th, which cities truly believe in addressing the missing middle housing component, and which cities may stand in the way of that in certain neighborhoods based on their FSR policy. So we're going to find out over the next several months, was this a gap by the provincial government? Is it going to cost us units? What type of zoning are we going to see where they restrict, where they shrink that FSR so there's not enough room for development there? But again, each city allowed to create their own policy, their own zoning bylaws essentially by June 30th. They've been having council meetings, of course, heading up to that date and tossing around different ideas. So until that date, we don't really know what they're formally going to come out with. But it'd be a shame if this big major policy outside of the transit-oriented development policy, which is different, if this policy didn't have as many teeth because of that FSR being left in the city's hands. Now, if you know anything about me, if you've been following my channel for a bit, I'm not in favor of any one entity, one group having complete power. Having said that, I think in this scenario where we have municipalities that have completely dropped the ball when it comes to development, densification over the last decade, I think sometimes you have to take that power away, and the province has done that. They have done that in many ways. I think the way the province is looking at it is they're saying, look, we are setting targets now. So any cities that don't meet these housing completion targets, essentially what happens is, each 6 months they have to report where they're at towards the target. And if they don't hit annually, they're going to have almost like a watchdog appointed, someone from the province appointed to their file to basically micromanage them. And I think I can speak for all of us here that none of us love to be micromanaged, and I don't think the cities are looking forward to that as well. So perhaps this is a more of an all-encompassing thought process by the province saying, look, we don't want to be completely restrictive. We don't want to take everything away from the municipalities. We want to give them some authority here. At the same time, we're putting pressure on them to hit targets so they are more motivated to not be restrictive with this FSR policy. Now, as we're talking about the different cities, Burnaby and Vancouver, I want to touch a little bit on city revenue and a lot of city revenue between all of the cities in the Lower Mainland. A lot of it comes from development. And one of these revenue sources, if you will, prior to this mass rezoning, were what are called community amenity contributions. And this would basically be when developers would pay to the cities to rezone a property so they could build, for example, a high rise, whatever it might have been. The city would collect these CACs and they would be very gray area and vague. Developers didn't really have a great line of sight how much they were going to have to pay. Sometimes it would come deeper in the development planning process. So, there's already a lot of skin in the game by the developer, and then all of a sudden they have to pay these CACs, and the cities would take them and they would use that money for amenities, recreation facilities, cultural centers, whatever it might have been. And now, when we look at Burnaby, it just came out that, they were expected, I believe it was 175 million they were expecting in CACs, and they actually only received 60 million last year. So very short on these CACs that they were expecting. And, not just Burnaby, cities plan future amenities based on what they expect they're going to get in terms of these contributions. So now Burnaby's looking at it, and they've expected to receive this large lump sum of money that they just didn't get last year, and they've virtually already spent it in terms of planning over the next 5 years towards amenity spaces. So you have to think, and the drop-off, just to mention, the drop-off of these CACs, couple reasons. Number one, it seems to be very much in line with when interest rates started to go up. So obviously as costs went up, developers couldn't afford as many CACs, development slowed down, and you saw this money coming into the city dropping. Secondly, when the province does a mass rezoning, they take away the ability for the cities to collect these CACs because they're already doing the rezoning. The rezoning's already in place. The developer does not have to essentially buy the rezoning with CACs. It's already in place. So the whole premise behind me speaking about this is our future, not just for Burnaby, not just for Vancouver, but these CACs that cities relied on to make our cities, livable places in terms of having these cultural centers and these amenities that obviously we all love. That revenue is going down. And, if there's one thing I think both you and I know, cities make revenue in two ways. They get it from two sources, developers and us. And so when we look at this, we have to think about it in two ways. How are our cities going to change now without these CACs? I'm in favor of not charging developers these CACs because we need them to build. We need to incentivize them, especially when the rates are so high and development is, screeching to a halt. We need to incentivize them, and we shouldn't be dropping a charge on them at the end of the process saying, hey, do you want it? If you really want this development, here's what you're going to have to pay. So we shouldn't be doing that. But we also have to realize now that a big source of city revenue is going to be chopped up. And it's going to be cut in most cities where development is slowing down, and that burden is going to fall on you and I. And realistically, we're going to see amenities being more heavily scrutinized. We're going to see cuts when it comes to amenities. Our cities are going to change. And again, being in this high rate environment, not a lot of margin out there, developers scaling back. Thankfully, or unthankfully, however you want to look at it, it's sounding as if we are done with the rate hiking cycle, and we're going to be in line for rate cuts moving forward. June 5th is the next announcement by the Bank of Canada. Right now, the markets are suggesting a greater than 50% chance that we're finally going to see our first rate cut. All of the metrics are pointing to a stalled economy and the time being right for a rate cut. The reason I said, unthankfully, there are some people out there that don't want to see rates cut. I see it in the comment sections. They want to see rates continue to go up. People get crushed. That's not going to happen. There will be a cut. May not happen in June. If not June, very likely July. But we may be looking forward now to a rate cutting cycle, things getting a little bit easier over the mid and long term for developers. But this is something to watch. The amenities in our cities, the multiplexes, are we going to actually get the densification we expect we're going to get from these multiplexes? We're going to have a lot of answers over the next couple of months. By next week's video, I should have an update as well on May sales data. So that's going to be very interesting to see. Did condos hold in price? Did they drop in price? We will talk about that in next week's video. But that's what I have for you for this week. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. What that does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can also learn from it. And if you like weekly real estate content, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. And again, if you're in the Metro Vancouver area or the Fraser Valley, you want to talk with me one-on-one about your real estate situation, just book me for a free call, or you can send me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever's easiest for you. I'd love to chat with you, but I want to thank you again for watching this week's video, and I look forward to seeing you next week.